I want to help you reach your highest sewing potential this year. I want you to walk in a store and walk out without buying anything because you know you can make it better. Honestly, with the way that fast fashion is producing things these days, maybe even a beginner sewist can sew better than fast fashion, but I want to help you get all the way to high fashion sewing. So in this video, I want to lay out the things that are getting in your way and stopping you from reaching that potential. So first on this list is no surprise to anyone, you gotta stop thinking that you're above ironing. Not to be shady, but sometimes I can tell when people are skipping the ironing phase of their sewing project. And if I can tell in your TikTok, which is a flattened image, then it probably looks worse in real life. So you gotta fall in love with ironing, or at least make it a little bit tolerable. So you gotta work it into your workflow and practice ironing. And maybe that means setting up your workstation in a different way. I always have my iron plugged in, and that helps me save a little bit of time so I don't have to wait until my iron is the right temperature. And I like to wear like a padded slipper so that I don't get tired from being on my feet all day. Even a cheap iron will work for this, by the way. If your iron doesn't have steam capabilities, a separate spray bottle works great and sometimes could even work better because it's so targeted. Now, there's definitely a technique to ironing. You want to move your iron up and down as you're pressing the fabric. You don't want to be wiggling that iron because that could twist your fabric and misshape your cut pieces. And then when I sew a seam, I like to iron in place to kind of set that seam, and then I press it in the direction where I want that seam to lay. And then your iron will probably already tell you this, but you want to use low for synthetic and silks, medium for wool, and sometimes a polyester blend. And you definitely want to use high for anything that's cotton or linen because that's going to give you the crispest seams. And that's why it's great for beginner sewists, because you're not at risk for melting anything. And I just feel like it's very satisfying to sew with cotton or linen. Honestly, I could do a whole video on ironing. If you're interested in that, let me know. And now we're moving on to the next item, which is avoiding zippers or choosing the wrong zipper. Look, I have definitely talked about how I don't like sewing zippers for other people in my gift guide videos, but zippers are so important. You're not gonna get any better at sewing zippers by avoiding them, and you're limiting yourself in terms of fit if you're afraid of zippers. That being said, especially if you're a beginner sewist, definitely pay attention to the type of zipper that a pattern is calling for, because a regular zipper and a invisible zipper are not interchangeable, and a lot of times the pattern could be calling for different seam allowances so that you can get certain zippers to work. And so you just want to make sure that you are following what the pattern is calling for. Otherwise, you might waste your money on the wrong zipper. Also, as a personal goal for myself, this year, I think I want to sew more than just invisible zippers, because invisible zippers are actually quite weak. They break super easily. So I'm really in the mood to sew like a lapped zipper, for example. The last time I sewed a lapped zipper was literally in my fashion design program in college. So I really need to get back into it. Okay, another mistake you might be making is not using interfacing. Interfacing is so important because it adds structure to your garment where you need it, and it tends to be called for, especially at high stress areas like buttonholes or even around a zipper. So without interfacing, your sewing project is gonna be a little bit flimsy, and it might even break down a little bit faster with wear. I used to buy interfacing as I needed it from Joann's, depending on what my project was, but since they're no longer around, I bought this one from Wawak, which I really like, although I think it only comes in white. But yeah, it's been great for all types of different projects that I need, so highly recommend. It's a really good quality one. The Pellon brand also makes cheaper ones that are more like plasticky, and those are totally fine if you're starting out, but I really recommend this Wawak one if you're more like an intermediate to advanced sewist. Okay, you might hate me for this next one, but I am such a big believer in making a toile or a first draft muslin. Some people swear by making a wearable toile, but for me it's just faster to make that toile in muslin, so I prefer that. But I highly recommend making a toile. It's gonna help you perfect the fit of your garments, which in turn will make you want to wear your sewing projects out because you'll be so proud of them. Also, when you sew a toile, you're kind of doing a practice round. So when you sew with the real fabric, you already kind of know what you're doing, and it just makes that process go even faster. So if you're really hung up on it being a waste of time, you might want to reconsider that. It also will save money in terms of not wasting a fabric. So I just really highly recommend making a toile. And I guess also because I self-draft, making a toile is so necessary because I really don't know how the pattern is going to end up. I guess if you're a person who only uses sewing patterns, it's a safer assumption that you're going to end up with something wearable. So maybe a wearable toile makes more sense in that regard. But I still think it's necessary to make the toile first, and then you can tweak the pattern and get that fit exactly right, because it is just so satisfying. And getting the fit right doesn't need to be scary. It's actually so empowering once you get the hang of it. I might make a whole video on like fit adjustments, but I'm sure there's also a lot of resources on YouTube. The only thing standing between you and perfection is making a toile. So yeah, I could go on and on about that, but please make your toile. Another mistake that might trip up some beginner sewists is ignoring the grain line. In simple terms, the grain line is the direction the fibers go in the fabric. When something is straight grain, that means it's parallel to the selvage, and most of your patterns will want you to cut most everything on a straight grain. Cross grain is going perpendicular to the selvage edge, and bias cut is diagonal. So in some fabrics, straight grain could have stretch horizontally. In most fabrics, bias cut is the most stretch. And when you ignore the grain line, you could be affecting fit, and you definitely will be affecting the drape of your fabric. But once you get the hang of that, you can also purposely mess with the grain line to try to get the desired fit that you want. It's all about knowing the rules so that you can break them with intention. But yeah, for the most part, you can't just cut things out wherever you would like them. You should pay attention to the grain line. Okay, I used to struggle with this next one, and it's picking the wrong fabric. So what I used to do when I was younger is buy some cheap fabric to try to make use of it in different ways. But the fabric choice was kind of ruining my project. So for example, when I was in college, I wanted to make this beautiful pink trench coat that I thought was gonna be so fabulous, but I didn't want to pay for coating fabric because it's pretty pricey. I think it's about like $30 a yard. So I went and got some canvas fabric instead in a pink color, and it definitely ended up looking like a bathrobe. So maybe I should revisit that project actually and try to redeem myself, because that pink bathrobe was not it. So in my opinion, the most important thing to consider when you're going fabric shopping is weight. Because if you're making this like beautiful, flowy, drapey blouse, you don't want to be using like denim, because it's not going to work, or it's going to definitely give you a different look. If you are totally new to this and you really don't know what type of fabric you're looking for, I highly recommend going in a store and looking at similar items to try to get an idea of what the fabric feels like, how it drapes, and that'll definitely give you an idea of what you might need. Also, most fabric retailers will give you a suggestion of what a fabric would be good for. Also, one thing I've noticed that some retailers do is they tell you if your fabric will need a lining, which I really appreciate in this day and age without Joann's, because it was so nice to just be able to touch things in person and know that you are buying the right fabric. Okay, for this last one, I think it's a little dramatic to say that this is ruining your sewing project, but you are certainly limiting your creativity if you're always using a pattern that someone else made. I highly recommend getting a pattern making book and getting into drafting, and even just cloning your clothes and making little adjustments here and there. Once you get comfortable with pattern making, your only limitation is in your mind. And I just think that's a wonderful thing. Learning pattern making has been so empowering in my sewing journey. Obviously, I went to fashion school to really learn pattern making, but honestly, I think you learn the most skills just by doing. It's not really the classroom environment or someone lecturing you that's gonna make you learn something. It's getting in there and doing things, cutting out different shapes and seeing how they lay on a body. That's what's really gonna help you learn about pattern making. It's just body geometry, and it's so fun to play with. So I highly, highly, highly recommend. That is just a skill that has been so fun for me to really hone in on. I feel like I was barely scratching the surface of ways you can level up your sewing. So if you have any more suggestions for people, leave them down in the comments. And if you want to see any more videos inspired by some topics that I covered today, let me know. And yeah, that's all for today's video. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.